Everyday Inclusion and Belonging, where we talk about everything diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging under the sun. I am Mo Berkner-Boyd. I'm the founder of the Moxie Exchange and Everyday Inclusion app. I'm a white woman with mid-length red hair. I've actually thrown some purple highlights in it because you only live once. Wearing a black shirt, some black cat eye eyeglass frames, and behind me is my bookshelf. I was telling Regina and Abby before we went live that this is one of my favorite Everyday Inclusion Live conversations that we have because we're talking about data. And we're talking about data that is collected from the Everyday Inclusion app. So Everyday Inclusion is a solution that really operationalizes inclusion. It delivers inclusion nudges, and everyone from newest employee up through C-suite is using it. And we say that the data that it collects on the back end, aggregate and anonymous, so no personally identifiable information is collected. It's how people are learning and engaging choice-based on their own. Companies aren't telling them to do things. We say it's like inclusion learning in the wild. The range of companies is everywhere. I think the smallest company using the app is not even 100 people, up to over 200,000 employees. We've got everything from manufacturing to tech to healthcare to banking and financial services. So wide spectrum in terms of industries, size, where we've got global companies. We have companies that have one location in one city. And what we do every year is take a look, analyze that data, and pull out what are some of the trends, what are some of the themes, what is the data telling us? Because data tells a story. And then what do we do with that data story? So I know somebody from the Moxie team is going to drop in the chat the link where y'all can download all of the data insights. I'm going to go through those really quickly, and then I'm going to introduce, let me do this. Let me introduce y'all first, and then we'll go through the core data insights, and then have a conversation about what's the story this data is telling us. So Abby, I'm going to start with you. So Abby has nearly 20 years experience in learning technology industry, including product, customer success, and people management. She knows what it takes to build productive and engaged teams. Abby is the Senior Director of People for Open Sesame. And in that, she combines her expertise with her passion for people to lead Open Sesame's recruiting, training, diversity, and employee experience programs. And what she didn't say in this bio that I'm going to say, she's also the mom of 3. And so I always do this, hats off to the working moms. That is not for the faint of heart. So Abby, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And Regina Johnson, some of you may have seen her on a past Everyday Inclusion Live. It's been a while, Regina, so I'm excited to be in conversation about this. She is the Chief Human Resources Officer for MarketCast, and she leads all HR and people initiatives, including shaping employee experience, driving talent management, and building the diversity and inclusion strategy with her teams around the globe. She has spent her career as a people leader for businesses, and I love this, that have data analytics, research, and technology at their core. So before MarketCast, Regina was head of HR at Western Asset Management, a global investment firm, and she serves on Moxie's board of advisors. And has been doing that for a long time. So Regina, thank you for joining us. And hopefully we'll see, we all know how schedules go. Cinnamon Clark, who is the practice lead for diversity, equity, and inclusion at McLean & Company. So hopefully she'll be joining us. If not, we're going to roll with it because that's what we do here. Are the two of you ready to have this conversation? I am.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
So I love sifting and sorting through the data and looking at the meta trends that come up. And what we found this year is that there are some core trends, and we're going to talk about all of those. The first is that there's a really broad spectrum of information, tools, resources that people need. It's everything from how to some of those key moments to little everyday interactions. And what is interesting is what we saw is, there's a lot of focus in a lot of organizations that let's get our leaders trained up, and particularly our senior leaders, and let's get them trained on moments that matter. What that data is telling us is people need way more than that. So if you're only focusing on the moments that matter, you're missing a whole wide spectrum of everyday interaction needs that folks have. The second is that every person is on an individual journey. It's really interesting, particularly, I have these conversations all the time, and I almost always start conversations by asking, where is your company on your DEI journey? That's really different than where individuals are on an inclusion journey. I might join a company that is really new to the work, but my own journey, I'm way further along. Or I might join a company that has been doing things for forever, but I don't know anything. And so what we're seeing is it doesn't matter where an organization is. Individuals are going to use a tool, use resources for where they are and where their team is on the journey. Really interesting too. There's no difference, company size, industry. Tech companies are not seeing any sort of different use patterns than manufacturing companies. And so I think often we think about even industry maturity impacting, doesn't make a difference. 200-person company versus 200,000 doesn't make a difference. So it really is about where individuals and where teams are. The third is that everyone is leaning in. Everyone is leaning in and doing the work, which I think is super, super cool. So we have, really high use and in particular, some patterns of use for managers and above, where they're doing things like gamification. They're sharing their badges more to really demonstrate to their teams, right, that they're using this. Where I think people think the opposite of that, like, oh, the leaders aren't going to use the gamification piece. Well, they are, and they are to show their team, like, hey, let's keep doing this. And then really, again, individual contributors role, and the app splits it up: individual contributor, team leader, manager, right, all the way through C-suite. We're seeing some of those same patterns of use, which is, again, really phenomenal. And last but not least, and I think that this is somewhat intuitive, but it's just so important, and that is frontline managers are truly the epicenter of inclusive cultures. We hear often this starts at the top, and certainly it starts at the top from a resource standpoint, right, from saying that's important. But when we're talking about what actually shapes inclusive culture, it's at that microculture level. It's what are those frontline leaders and managers doing, and how are they creating culture? And the other piece is there is this really inverse relationship with how high somebody is up the food chain and their impact on daily inclusive culture, right? So those frontline leaders, managers, they are the epicenter. So that was a lot. Let's dig in and talk about what does that mean? So I think, Abby, some of the top screen views, some of the data that gets recorded is, again, aggregate anonymous. What are people looking at? What are people searching for? And what are they favoriting? And what we saw from the data, Abby, is that some of those are just really basic things, like looking at the calendar or how to talk about disability. And I'm curious what your take is on that. Like, are you surprised? Are you not surprised? Is that something that you looked at and said, and how are those trends playing out in your organization?
For sure. Yeah, I'm Not surprised in a lot of ways, because that's the stuff that we're hearing from our people too, like on an individual basis and in surveys. And when I anecdotally get comments from folks, that it is the little things that make really big differences to people. Yes, everybody wants to know that we're working on the big stuff. But like, they want to know pay equity, representation and leadership. They want to know that we are training leaders and managers. They want to know the big stuff's happening.
Yeah.
But on a day-to-day basis, the things that really impact me are the little things. How are people talking to me? How am I engaging? Do I feel like I belong and have, community at work that I can lean on? So yes, we are seeing lots of little things. I made some notes of like some of the little everyday interactions and what we're doing that have been successful for us. I think are good takeaways that like, low cost, we have consultants, we have budget. I don't know if everybody knows Open Sesame. We're an online training provider. So we have customers coming at us from all angles on all spectrums of the journey, needing training courses, from the like checkbox unconscious bias, one course for every employee, to folks that are much further along and that want entire training curriculums around DEI, and B, the belonging and wellness. So we live in this world, we serve our customers in this world, but it's also something we're living as an employer with our teammates. So early on, and now I think it's kind of common practice, at least for us, is normalizing pronouns. We know even just a few years ago, that was like, why, what? We were still educating people on why that was important. Even if I'm a cisgendered white woman, it's still important for me to say that she, her, or my pronouns, because that makes space for somebody else that may not have their cis pronouns, or may have something else that they want to be known by, or a preferred name. So we're normalizing that. We're collecting that as early as interviews, preferred names, pronouns, and then we use them. We use them in signatures. We use them in Zoom. We use Slack a lot. So in Slack, we use them on name badges when we're together. Just every day reminding people and making it at the forefront of people's minds, as well as some early training that like, it's okay to be an ally. It's okay to say, hey, oh, Joe's pronouns are actually they, them. If you hear somebody misuse their pronouns, like that's okay. Let's not make a big deal of it, but let's educate people on how they can support and move on and inform people in the process. So that's an everyday interaction.
I'm gonna have you pause for just a second, because what is interesting is in our 2021 data report, and again in 2022, gender neutral pronouns is in top screen views, top search terms, and top content favorited. And I think what is interesting about this is one that is so simple for organizations to say, oh yeah, no, we've done that. But what do people want? They need that everyday reminder. They need that information. They need to understand. I get questioned all the time. What's the difference between gender and sexual orientation? And right, and so I love that you all you understand that it doesn't matter how Open Sesame's been doing this work. You've normalized it and you're embedding it in your day-to-day.
Yeah. And it wasn't, it seems like super simple thing, but even a number of years ago, it wasn't so easy and obvious. And people were like, why do I need he, her, him, or she, her? Like, it's obvious, everybody knows, but we've gotten to a place where that's very commonplace and acceptable. And so a new hire comes on and joins, and it's just part of the process for them to introduce themselves or to put it in their Slack or Zoom profile. We're a remote company. I don't know if everybody what the makeup of the group is, but things have also changed becoming a remote company. We went remote with COVID, so 3 years ago. And so a lot of those things are still happening in the remote workforce. Similarly, I've got a couple remote things and then some in-person things that we're doing. We live on Zoom every day, all day. This is how we live our life. And so we've gotten a lot of feedback. We do have, again, in the terms of big things, we have ERGs. We have groups that are meeting together in affinity and in community and giving us feedback as an organization. And some of that feedback is amazing and easy to implement and simple tweaks that if they don't impact me, I never would have realized or thought about it, but it just embeds everyday inclusion into what we're doing. So for example, we have a neurodiversity ERG. So folks of various ability and neurodiversity situations, and they give us great feedback on like, this would make our lives a little bit easier. So things like, give us a heads up if we're going to have a company meeting or a team meeting with breakout sessions. If I'm going to be expected to talk on a topic in a small group, it helps me to know that in advance. Okay, that's easy. Let's just add it to the agenda if there's a breakout session, or give people an announcement at this top of the meeting. So little tweaks like that. We allow folks to turn their cameras off. We have marketing. I'll demonstrate. We've got a nice little graphic that's like, it's okay. It normalizes it. We're a very camera on organization, but if you need a break, we acknowledge that that's reality sometimes, and that's okay. And then we summarize topics from full company meetings of what the key takeaways are. So we do a full company meeting every Friday, about 45 minutes to an hour. It's not always the best format for everybody to take and receive the big takeaways, or there might be 2 or 3 takeaways out of a 1-hour meeting. We want people to be able to absorb that and refer back to that. So that's another one that we do.
I'm going to have you stop again, because again, in 2021 and 2022, some of the top viewed, searched, favorited content is around how to run inclusive meetings. And we have content that is both about virtual and in person, right? So it's all of the, again, people want they want the nitty gritty, right? They want the nitty gritty of how.
Yeah. So hopefully these are like some little like tips that somebody can just write down and like, oh, we could do that. That's easy. Like some of these things are things that like 5 years ago, I didn't even think about. I wouldn't have thought about my personality, my style, my perspective, just like over my head, or not something that impacts me. But then somebody says it, and I'm like, oh, why don't we do that? Let's do it.
Right.
So yeah. So I've got a few things for in-person events, because we've gone to about 3 times a year, full company in-person events now that we're fully remote. And so that's been a learning curve in the midst of the pandemic. What did that look like now that we're slightly coming out of that? But what does that look like? People are not used to being in a full company meeting, out of state, out of, where their comfort zone. So we've done some things there to hopefully increase inclusion at our in-person events. Again, mostly from like little feedback, surveys, suggestions out of our ERGs to make things more effective for them for the events. So our name tags, this one came directly from COVID, living in a pandemic, little stickers, red, yellow, green. And it started out with like, how much mask? Do you want an elbow bump versus handshake? Do you want a hug? It started out as that. And then as we kind of slowly are easing out of COVID times, people have asked, can we keep that up? Like, regardless of whether there's a pandemic or illness, I still don't want to hug anybody. And I like having that visual indicator and knowing who wants to hug, who wants to high five, and kind of everybody's comfort level. So we're doing that still. We just had a big kickoff party in January in Arizona, and we usually do a big party night, and we did live band karaoke and a big presenter and dancing all night. And we got some feedback at some of our last events that it'd be really nice to not have to go to a bar to get a drink, even though there's lots of non-alcoholic drinks. People weren't feeling like that was the most inclusive situation for everybody in their experience and their environment. So this last time we created, and we had a separate bar that was just mocktails, just non-alcoholic drinks. And we didn't really know how that was going to go or how much use it would get, but it was super widely appreciated from folks from all aspects of the business, which is great. We've done quiet zones. We incorporated quiet zones, especially when you have loud parties. That was another suggestion out of our neurodiversity ERG, a space that they could kind of get away from the noise and music. We often have live bands. And then conversation prompts at tables on name badges, etc., so that when you're sitting with somebody who's not on your team or in your everyday interaction, or somebody that you don't know how to relate with, sometimes it's helpful just to have some prompts. Let's talk about it. Where are you from? What ERGs do you participate in? What's your favorite emoji in Slack? Like things like that, so that just to get people talking. And that I think helps with inclusion and belonging for everybody. If you're having great conversation, that's fine. but we don't want people to feel the discomfort of getting to know people in person for the first time and not knowing what to talk about. So lots of little tweaks to our in-person events over the last couple of years.
Well, and I think that is right. That is really to the heart of it. Inclusion is about the little things. When we're talking about equity, right? We're not talking about equity here. We're not talking about diversity, right? Those are systems, those are leadership. We're talking about inclusion. We're talking about inclusion, belonging, little tiny things every day. Regina, we talked about this. It showed up in 2021. It's showing up again in 2022. Let's talk about this idea of folks being on the individual journey. Right, because I even love, for example, Abby, everything that you were just sharing. You all have been doing the work around pronouns for several years, but somebody might be joining the organization that it's entirely new to them. Regina, were you surprised at that? In terms of didn't matter, industry doesn't matter, how long an organization, and what's your take on that? And how do you all look at that at MarketCast?
Absolutely, Mo. And I think, we've talked about this in the past, which is, when you think about what it means to drive real inclusion and belonging within organizations and companies, there is how you create structure, right? How you create the ecosystem. There's also then once that ecosystem is created, it's those little networks, it's the process, it's the individual interactions, all of the things that then start to make up, right, the actual culture, and that gets created. And I think in looking at the data and whether or not I was surprised, initially I thought, I'm a little bit surprised, but when I really thought about it, I thought, well, no, I'm not, because most organizations, when they're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, if they get to that, they tend to sometimes be a little bit more narrow in their scope and where they choose to focus. They may focus in on one particular initiative that ties into, let's say, maybe driving gender parity, or they may be looking to focus in on increasing, broader inclusive demographic leadership at all levels in an organization, or they may be focused in on how their products and solutions have a much more positive impact in uplifting communities. I'm just giving various different examples on where a company and organization might look to focus. And while it's great to be able to focus in on certain key initiatives, the double-edged sword with that is then you miss out on the broader opportunities and the broader moments, right? We just heard Abby give great examples of individual moments where this ties and directly links into culture and directly ties into how you think about driving inclusivity in a company or within an organization. So the data actually then doesn't surprise me in that sense. It's most organizations sometimes just focus a little too much and try and not think a little more broader. And they may also sometimes miss those opportunities to seek input and to seek feedback at that individual level and to actually understand where people are at that individual level. And so what does that mean when I think about, MarketCast and our company and our organization? We've got bright, brilliant, researchers, data scientists, people who are really, wanting to understand insights at the fundamental level, both through core research and also through, various ways of AI and data science. And I think in those instances, it really means that the work that we do as a company and as an organization forces us as individuals, forces us as an organization to always continue to be curious and to always make sure that we're thinking beyond maybe just our inside out mentality, but also outside in. And the reason that that's so core and so important, and by the way, we built that into our core values because we do know that that is so key and critical to who we are and the research and the work that we do, but also in terms of how we interact and engage with each other as teams. The ability to understand then those day-to-day moments, right? And where inclusion is showing up versus where it's not is what's really, really important to us. So where we've been really starting to focus our time and attention this year is digging in more at that individual level, more at that frontline manager level, to make sure that we have more what I call real-time check-ins, right? Not just kind of more of the longitudinal surveys, but more of those real-time check-ins in various different ways, so that we really start to understand. And by the way, the Everyday Inclusion app is going to be part of that journey as we think about our survey work. So thank you, Mo. But that's going to help us to really kind of understand, in addition to the listening sessions that we usually do, in addition to kind of the education series that we do, in addition to soliciting feedback around ways in which, what can we do better? What are the things you want to see directly, so that we can essentially improve, and that we're adding value, or what we think will add value to you as both the individual, as well as what it means, for us as a company. Those are the things that we're really focusing in on, so that we can get down deep at that individual level and where that essentially shows up. Because we do know everybody's journey. We have, the thing I love about our organization, we have every generation, in our workforce, and they all have different needs, and they're all on different, career paths, learning paths, personal growth aspiration paths. And it's really incumbent upon us to understand where people are in that journey as we think about our organization, our company, and what it means from a growth perspective. And if we do those things right, guess what that means? That means not only do we have a healthy culture, but we also have healthy alignment. We have healthy work. The work is phenomenal, and our clients are delighted, right? All of those things become building blocks into what I call a healthy ecosystem and a healthy company and a healthy organization.
I love everything, right, in terms of, and both of you mentioned this, having a really good, deep listening strategy, right? That as those feedback loops, and I'll often ask somebody, if they say, yeah, we have an engagement survey, I'll say, if this was your kid, would you want them to feel engaged or like they were included and belong? And are you doing that engagement survey once a year? If so, tell me how much did you feel like you were included and belong July 28th of this year? Right? If you're not taking that pulse, and if you're not specifically measuring that emotion of inclusion, and if you don't have a way to find out, what are those topics? What are those things that people need? I think we've been talking about the metadata and the trends from the metadata. I will tell you, there's not been a single organization using the app who hasn't been surprised by some of their data, right? What people are searching for, what people are looking at. And I think when people read, the top 10, there are surprises, right? There are surprises around religion. There are surprises around neurodiversity. There are surprises around, I think people think, and some of the obvious things are there. And then some other things that it's like, wow, I would not, if I were making an assumption, that wouldn't have been one of my assumptions. And so I think in all of this, right, how do you create experiences that are unique to the team? How are you doing deep listening across your organization and really understanding that this is literally every single day in the hands of your frontline leaders? And what are you doing to equip those folks? Because they're often the newest in a leadership role, right? And they have the greatest impact on whether people are staying or leaving your organization. Whether, Regina, to your point, you're getting the best and brightest out of them because they are fully engaged in an environment where they can thrive. Oh my gosh. So y'all, I don't know, like the two of you just dropped a whole bunch of really practical things, and that is near and dear to my heart. I would love for you to leave me with one last truth bomb around inclusion and data, and what you can do as organizations to really make sure that you're using data to drive some of your inclusion. I'm sort of giving you a twist on the question that I told you I was going to ask you, but one last truth bomb for me, Abby.
Yeah, I think just obviously looking at the data, surveying the data as you're talking on meta and micro levels, and then what we've done a lot of is just hopefully training people and our team and our managers to know that the intent is good, and that hopefully everybody is in alignment with that, because we don't want to paralyze people with this fear of doing the wrong thing, because we saw that for a while when DEIB became a big initiative of not paralyzing people. So I love to tell people, if you shine, then I shine. If you shine, the company shines. And always just making sure that folks know that there's no winning number or game or team, that everybody, for always making other people shine in this process, that that's what we're striving for, and all boats rise with that tide. So.
I love that. And I love the idea of people being able to shine. That's Regina, give me your truth bomb.
From my vantage point, it's meet people where they're at. At the end of the day, when you think about where somebody is in their life journey, right? And DE&I is part of that, both in the workplace, by the way, also beyond the workplace. These are concepts that don't just, aren't just within a business setting, right? This happens in life. And when we think about these are also life skills at the end of the day. And as we think about what it means for, let's say, those frontline managers, like you said, who are new, how do we ensure we equip them? But more importantly, we also give space to understand where they're at in this journey. And we do the right things on being able to pivot and shift, right? Based on where they're at. And then as you think about, again, the front line, and their interconnectedness, it's understanding and meeting that individual where they're at. And you'd be amazed. I mean, there's so many examples when you think at the individual level, what you learn in those instances of where an individual is at. There are things that managers, leaders learn from individuals. And by the way, they can also shape strategy and business and innovation, right? It's in addition to the personal aspects and the personal growth that you can see from that. And I think by the listening and being curious, those two pieces are essential to meeting somebody where they're at. If you can listen and you can be curious, then you will be successful in being able to understand how to meet that person where they're at.
I love it. You've heard me say this a million times, and I will say it a million more. Curiosity is an inclusion superpower.
Yeah.
And I think getting curious about different ways you can collect data as an organization. Right. And then looking at that data and what are tools, what are resources. I really, really appreciate the conversation. I think that there is always, you never want data just for data's sake. So I love, you all, any of you will drop, if we haven't already, somebody on the team is going to drop the links to download the full report. There's, to me, again, it feels like a treasure hunt when I'm looking. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. I didn't realize this was going to be here this year. So I hope you all enjoy digging in on the data as much. And importantly, then taking action. What does that look like in your organizations? What can you do as a leader? How can you equip every single person in your organization with the tools, the resources to shine? I always say to thrive, but I really like shine. Particularly the team knows that Earth, Wind, and Fire, Shining Stars. I think that's like the DEI song of all DEI songs. So thank you, Abby. Thank you, Regina. And everybody, get out there, collect some data if you're not already, and do the next right thing. Cheers.
Thank you.